But can you introduce yourself and how you first got involved in the sector, please?
Yeah, so as Jamie has said, Neil Bird from Gaston Schul. Personally, I've been in the logistics industry for more than 40 years now. Started out as a junior customs clearance clerk, or dock runner as we used to call ourselves in those days.
A dock runner?
A dock runner, yeah.
Literally on the docks?
Yeah, literally on the docks. In those days, customs clearance was a very manual process, which involved lots of pieces of paper. I think the first customs declaration I ever did was on an 8-page carbon interleaved form known as a C10. Most of you in the room probably don't even remember carbon paper, let alone paper handwritten customs declarations. But in those days, pre-computerization, those customs declarations had to be physically inspected by a customs officer in something called an entry processing unit. And our office in those days was located about a 10-minute walk from the customs office. So my role as the youngest member of staff was to be given a handful of these documents at 5 minutes to 4.
CF10s?
C10s.
C10s.
At 5 minutes to 4, and told to sprint to the customs house because the senior customs officer slammed the window shut very promptly at 4 o'clock. So that's what we would call dock runners, because we had to literally hand carry pieces of paperwork around the docks and the customs house.
So you've seen lots of changes, obviously, in the sector, and what would you say in the last few years has been the how should I put this, the most positive effect on the whole sector, and something which has been a bit of a curveball, something which has been more, apart from COVID, of course, which has been more of a challenge? So what's in the last few years, let's say within the last 5 years?
So I think the biggest challenges around customs, those of you that are involved in customs will know that Brexit has been a very significant challenge to customs brokers and to importers and exporters alike. One of the things that Gaston Schul works very hard on is compliance. And one of the things that we found is there's an awful lack of knowledge within the industry, particularly around those companies that, as a result of Brexit, were exposed to customs for the first time. And by that I mean those industries that only ever previously dealt with the EU. So if they had grown up since 1992, which was when we stopped doing customs declarations on intra-EU movements, those companies had absolutely no exposure to customs at all. So they found Brexit a significant challenge. What we're finding is, at the moment, those companies are still finding it a challenge. And what that's leading to is a lot of problems in the accuracy of customs declarations.
What advice would you give to traders who are looking to maintain that all-important compliance, especially given recent changes?
So what we recommend is regular auditing. Customs is effectively a self-assessed tax. So good business practice would suggest that you should be regularly reviewing your customs function. And key to that is understanding and making sure you have a really good knowledge of the key foundations of customs clearance, which are classification, and by that I mean selecting the right quality code for your products, valuation, so knowing the correct value that you should be declaring to customs, and origin and preference, which is a really key issue at the moment. It's something which is, again, causing a lot of problems for those companies that don't really understand the rules. So only last week I was talking to a company who had been importing goods from China, putting them in a different box, sticking a label on them, exporting them to Belgium, accompanied by a UK origin preference statement. Repackaging of goods is not processing them sufficiently. I can see some people smiling in the audience who obviously do understand customs rules. Repackaging an item is not sufficient processing for you to be able to change its origin. So those products have been imported into Belgium and have been had a preference claimed on, unfortunately, which is clearly not where you want to be with HMRC.
I think I sort of probably assume that obviously you're a main player in the sector, but for those who don't know what Gaston Schul do, are you able to, it's obviously to the customers and clients, but could you share in, if you can, in a nutshell, exactly what you do or the products and services that you offer as a business to those in the room and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Gaston Schul, well, what we describe ourselves as a full service customs provider. And by that what we mean is that we create import, export and transit customs paperwork to accompany consignments that are shipped effectively anywhere around the world. We have offices in the UK, headquartered in the Netherlands. We also have offices in Belgium, Germany, Norway, and hopefully we're going to have some exciting news in the next couple of weeks about further development in the Nordics. So keep your eye on socials for an announcement in the next week or so about some further development. But within that, what we also try to do is advise importers and exporters about customs rules and regulations. So quite often that will involve training, education. I think education is something that is really lacking within our industry. Really interested on Richard's comments about training earlier. There isn't a great deal of training within the customs clearance sector. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is young people enter the business and are sat down and told that you put this piece of information in this box and that piece of information in another box, but they're never really properly educated as to why you do that. So they end up actually just learning the bad habits that the people teach them, which is, again, leading to issues around the accuracy of those declarations that they're creating, which then leads to problems with HMRC.
I might wrap up with a question about HMRC actually, because everyone hears stories and so forth. We get to hear it from the top, as it were. A bit of advice. We've got about 7 minutes left, so we might open the floor up to a question or two as well. But before we do, a bit of advice again from the top from you, Neil. How can companies ensure that they are using the correct value for customs?
Very good question. I think the key to that is understanding the Incoterms under which you're moving the products. You have to ensure that any freight and insurance costs are included in the value for duty, UK costs included in the value for VAT. Very important that you understand what valuation method you're using. There are actually 6 different valuation methods that you can choose from. You also need to understand if the importer is paying any buying commissions, because they may need to be included in your customs value. You need to think about things like royalties and license fees. If they're payable to your supplier, they may be needing to be included in the customs value as well. And making sure that you're fully conversant, as I said earlier, with the Incoterm, because that very much influences the value which you have to declare to customers.
What are again, a bit of advice, again from your experience, or maybe from your customer's experience, what are the implications of, or for, misunderstanding the all-important rules of origin?
Yeah, good question. Rules of origin are very complicated. The World Customs Organization say that the purpose of rules of origin is to actually identify the economic origin of goods rather than the geographic origin of goods. What's actually meant by that is the country which the goods are shipped from is not necessarily the country of origin of the product. If you don't understand where your product originates, you could end up making a false claim to a preference. As I alluded to earlier, the company that was re-exporting Chinese goods were guilty of doing that. It could also mean that you're paying too much duty because you're missing out on a claim to a preference that you might be entitled to. The problem is with rules of origin, they can be very, very complicated. It can depend on the value of non-originating materials in your finished product. It can also depend on the classification of your product as well. So if you are involved in importing and exporting, you need to be very confident about the origin of your product. And I would certainly recommend that if you've got any uncertainty about that at all, that you take advice and you talk to somebody who does understand the rules of origin, which is a service that Gaston Schul offers as part of our consultancy and advice.
Maybe it's a stupid question, let's hope not. Are you open for people to come have a chat with you today about those sort of challenges, maybe set up a one-to-one with you in the future?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm here all day, as they say. And we'll be hanging around later on as well.
In the bar.
In the bar.
It's over there. Yeah.
So yeah, if you've got any questions at all about customs compliance, about importing and exporting rules, then please come and have a chat. And be really keen to hear if you've got any horror stories about HMRC. Unfortunately, we tend to all too often we get involved when it's too late. I always like people to be proactive and not reactive. Unfortunately, by the time you've got a letter from HMRC, it tends to be too late. Just as I was leaving the office last night, I actually had a message on LinkedIn from a solicitor friend of mine asking if he thought there was any possibility I might be able to mount a challenge to HMRC on behalf of his client, because his client had just received a demand for £900,000 from HMRC. I suspect, I haven't seen all the details yet, but I suspect it may be too late. So if you've already had that letter from customs, then they've already found something fairly seriously wrong with what you've been doing. So,
yeah, fair warning, I think.
Absolutely.
Like palms.
Just on that point, HMRC are actively engaged in increasing audits to pre-pandemic levels now. They had a bit of a lull during the pandemic. They also obviously had a lot of work for their officers to do in dealing with Brexit, but they are now back out doing face-to-face audits with people and they're looking for money. I read some work that a consultancy firm had done recently. Part of that work was a Freedom of Information request, which suggested that revenue from fines as a result of audits has risen 74% since 2021. So, a word of warning, HMRC are out there and they are looking for revenue.
Okay, well look, I think we've got, before we introduce our next speaker, then we have some lunch. I think we've got time for one question here, if that's okay. I'm slightly overrunning, it's my responsibility. I spoke too long at the beginning, as always. So, a question for me, bear in mind we've got 40 years in the sector, right? So 40 years of experience, I know that you've worked in everything, it's always on the docks, as a dockhand, as it were, to now being involved in this premium company. So, questions please, one from Richard here. Go for it.
How is technology, because you talked about issues in verification of the information that you're putting in documentation, etc. So how is technology impacting your industry?
Good question, Richard, thank you. Technology has had a big influence on customs clearance. As I said earlier, when I started in the industry, everything was done on pieces of paper. My issue with technology is that it now means that very often, or even I would go as far as to say the majority of situations, customs declarations are no longer actually physically looked at by a customs officer, whereas they used to be when we had pieces of paper. The problem with the technology that processes what we now do is that it accepts the data that you input into it, and it has no ability to verify that. So if you're importing apples, but you inadvertently put the commodity code for pears into the customs system will accept that as long as it's a valid commodity code. If the system accepts it, it's the same as the value. The customs computer system doesn't know what the value of the product is, and neither does it see the supplier's invoice. So if you have a consignment worth $100,000 and you mistype that into the customs processing system, you put a decimal point in the wrong place, a typing error, it will accept the data that you've input into it. So that's why we try to advocate that importers audit every declaration that's done on their behalf by a third party, because we see so many errors in what the third parties are doing, and that then directly impacts the importer.